A very special episode of Daily Delivery today. Actually, two of them coming up in a row. All talk with Jeff Day of the Star Tribune, multi-platform writer and editor. We are going to enthrall you with a draft of sorts, best and worst trades in Minnesota sports history. We're doing our 10 today, 5 each. We're going to do 10 of the best today. We're going to do the 10 worst on tomorrow's show. Jeff, are you ready for this?
To me, I'm thrilled. Am I ready? Absolutely not, because I don't know where you're going to go. And I don't know that I don't even have a firm understanding of my own opinion on some of these. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to get into it, to get your perspective. And, but I think, now you tell me, my thoughts about this, was there's been so much chatter about Rudy Gobert over the past year. It's just
and I bet we'll get to that. And I bet we'll get to that tomorrow.
And yes, okay. And so anyway,
but yes.
I loved going back and thinking about some of these trades and trying to figure out how do you rationalize some of them in retrospect on both sides. Some of them are so good and some of them are so heinously bad. So anyway, I'm really excited.
Well, you have the first overall pick in today's best trades draft. I tried to give you the first overall pick in both drafts as a gracious host. I was trying to be the Tim Connolly of this, trying to give you all the number one picks, but I didn't. You gave one back. You were a kind general manager, more kind than Danny Ainge in Utah. And again, we'll get to Rudy Gobert tomorrow. I would imagine we're not getting to him today. I don't think, unless you have a surprise in store for me, and you're going to argue that was one of the best. But you have, Jeff, the first overall pick in this quote unquote draft. And we're just going to go back and forth until each of us has made 5 picks and we get to 10. And we'll talk about it at the end a little bit too. But what is, in your estimation, the best trade in Minnesota sports history, your first overall pick?
This is, I can't tell if this is recency bias, because I was looking at two, one that's a little bit older. This one's one that's, you and I are both really familiar with.
Yeah.
I think just based on total package and everything that came in the wake of it, that the Twins landing Joe Nathan, Francisco Liriano, and Boof Bonser for AJ Pierzynski in 2003. To me, it's a perfect trade. They had Joe Mauer. It's like taking an expendable piece and turning it into something incredible. There was no loss in this, in my opinion. Pierzynski went on to have a nice career. There's no problem with that. But because you had Mauer, it made this an absolute wash, because you're just taking an expendable piece and turning it into one of the greatest closers of a generation. Liriano, I don't know what we say about him. His eyes were so electric, right?
Dominant until the injury, really. I mean, 2006 is a major what if in Twins history. If he doesn't get hurt and they've got him and Johan going into the playoffs.
Yes. I'll never forget. That was right towards the end of my years at college, and I was going to the Dome and watching him and Santana. And when he started lighting up that second half, as a Twins fan, you're like, it was impossible to even believe what you were seeing, because Santana had been so dominant, and all of a sudden the Twins have a pitcher who's more dominant than Santana.
Yes.
And of course the iconic Boof Bonser, who
he was okay. He was
all right. He was all right. So that to me is number one. I love that trade. I still think it can compete with any trade we'll talk about today.
That was on my list. I had it number 3, although I kind of toggled some things around. I kind of juggled some things around. But that certainly is, like, if you're just talking about like you said, dealing from a position of strength, dealing and just like what they wound up getting and how that impacted them, especially, Joe Nathan, who, I don't think San Francisco really knew what they had with him at the time, because he was like a converted infielder. They made him into a relief pitcher, and he was good for them, but he was a setup man there. This is back in more of the days of like the traditional closer. Twins immediately make him, pretty much make him their closer. He replaces Guardado as their closer and becomes an all-star, becomes this great pitcher for them for a number of years. And then Liriano with his dominance, even if it was a little bit short-lived. But then, he came back and was good in 2010 in particular. He was a big part of that rotation too. So the haul they got for Pierzynski, who like you said, they had Mauer. It's not like they were going to keep Pierzynski forever and block their number 1 overall pick from St. Paul. They weren't going to do that, right? So
But that's the thing too that we'll get into with this stuff. It's like, do you succeed from your position? I think is how you differentiate these two sides. And in this instance, they were in to me, not really a strong position, and yet somehow they came out with a tremendous win. So anyway, what do you got?
It's a little bit of a technicality, so I think there might be some controversy right off the jump here. But my first pick, my number 2 overall pick, Twins acquiring in a trade, technically a trade, Johan Santana from I believe it was the Marlins, Jared Camp. They traded Jared Camp and $50,000 to, I believe, the Marlins for the right to select Johan Santana. And they kind of swapped picks, it was a trade. Technically, it was a trade to get him out of the Rule 5 draft. And that's how he became a Twins product. And, nobody really knew what they had with him at the time. And, he was a guy that was left unprotected in the Rule 5 draft. Then all of a sudden he becomes, bullpen option, and he develops this changeup that is just completely unhittable. So a bit of a technicality, but it is technically a trade because they had to trade a player and cash. They didn't just physically select him in the Rule 5 draft. They had to make a trade in order to be able to select him first in the or have a shot at him in the Rule 5 draft. So that is my number 1 overall pick.
And I had it number 5 because I agree with you. That's a trade, and guy has to be one of the greatest just player acquisition moves in Terry Ryan's. Yes. I mean, unbelievable. So technicality a little bit, because I get what you're saying. It's not the traditional player for player. You're going after a prospect, but I'm trying to remember where Santana was at in his career at that point, because it wasn't like it took the Twins acquiring him and then an extremely long period of time for him to become what he became. It took a couple of seasons, but they saw something in him, is what I'm saying. They targeted him. They wanted to find him, and then they developed him in such an incredible manner. So I love that pick. I think it's fantastic.
Well, and they basically they could afford to too, because the rule of the Rule 5 draft is you had to keep that player on your major league roster for the entire season.
That's right.
So,
yes.
And that's the 2000 Twins, and they did not expect to be good. And he was not good for them that year. He was 2-3 with a 6.49 ERA. He made 5 starts, but mostly basically was like a long reliever that year. Had 54 walks and 64 strikeouts in 86 innings. He was not close to the pitcher he would become. The very next year, I think he kind of toggled between the minors and the majors. And then by 2002 is when he started to really develop into what he was going to be. But he wasn't even a full-time starter until 2004. They were still kind of messing around with, what is this guy? Who is this guy? I think maybe by the end of 2003, he was a full-time starter, but he made 27 relief appearances that year, kind of, mixing his roles. And finally they were like, okay, yeah, I guess this guy's pretty good. Then, 2004, 5, 6, 7, just dominant stretch, 2 Cy Youngs, and away you go.
Yeah. That element of them trying to figure him out, I think about how you have to have patience, with these young, especially with young pitchers, but is the world different? I'm trying to remember how I sort of absorbed the Johan Santana era. I remember we had Lavelle and Joe might have been our beat reporters at that time.
Probably, yeah.
And I remember they had some early Twins blogs going. I can remember that we had, and Howard had his kind of fans blog going. Right. Aaron Gleeman was picking up steam at some point in there. Now, you'll never know this, but no joke, like 2006 or something, I hosted a Twins podcast with a friend of mine.
Wow.
Yes, a company was starting an early, think Bleacher Report style idea, localized sports news. My buddy was in broadcasting, and so he had an in, and I became his kind of right. What would you call it? Sort of like I am to you right now, a non-expert talking all the time. Anyway, so I remember just those early days of fans really connecting. And I feel like Santana was one of the kind of galvanizing points of the early Twins internet. Because when he was in that third, fourth year, whatever you were saying there, where he was starting to emerge. Yeah. And people were going, oh my God, when the changeup started clicking and you go, we have got something here. What was more exciting than that? And I can still remember Patrick Royce writing a column about when Curt Schilling and Santana were facing each other in an early season match at the Dome. And it's just like what it was like to have an ace back on the Twins roster. It had been a long time since they had a real deal, just a shutdown pitcher. And they haven't really, unless you count Carl Pavano or something. I don't know.
they've not had a pitcher like him since then.
Barrios had glimpses, but never quite got it. And
no.
So anyway, yeah, that's a great pick. I think it's excellent.
Okay, who you got at number 3? Your second.
Okay,
pick.
We're going Vikings. Okay. This I think will appear. This person will appear on both sides.
Oh wow. Okay.
But because of the history, because of the legacy, I think the Vikings trading back to get Fran Tarkenton.
Yep.
After sending him to the Giants,
yes.
kind of taking back that air, reuniting him, bringing him and Bud Grant together, and all of the success that they would come to have. And you give away Norm Snead, Bob Grimm. Snead had a good career. But I like any trade where you are getting a player who comes to define a franchise. To me, Fran Tarkenton is as much the Vikings as almost anybody.
Yeah.
And it's also, this did not work out with Randy Moss, but it's the same kind of idea. It's like, we have made a mistake here.
Yes. Correcting a wrong. Quantum leaping. You're quantum leaping.
Yes.
Going back in time.
Yes. And I don't know. When I was looking at all of these trades and there's another one that I have, we'll see if you take it, but another one where you kind of have this moment of the player who you add that opens up a franchise.
Yes.
And to me, that was this move. And I don't know what should rank higher, the acquisition of Tarkenton or the trading away of Tarkenton. I think both are definitive moments in the Vikings franchise history, obviously.
Yes.
But to me, again, it just goes back to the Vikings are not the Vikings without Fran Tarkenton, and that doesn't happen unless they, make the decision ahead of the 72 season to say we're going to bring the guy back. So
took him to 3 Super Bowls. He's a Hall of Famer. I mean, that was that was the missing piece, more or less. They had the defense, and they needed a little bit more offense, and he obviously gave them a lot more offense. And like neither one of us were alive for that era, but you can only imagine like what his ability. And it's like the original running and throwing quarterback, right? Like one of them, like he would have been perfect for the modern game.
But again, it goes back to the thing. We were not alive for Fran Tarkenton, but I can recognize a highlight of Fran Tarkenton instantly.
Oh yeah.
And again, he is such a defining figure in Minnesota sports. And it's one of those, like you said, it's a what if. It's kind of, what happens if he doesn't come back to the franchise? There's no way that they reach the levels of success that they had, and I don't think that they are quite as beloved in Minnesota if he is not their quarterback for all those years. So for those reasons, I think it's one of the best trades in state history. I
like it. I had him on my list at number 4, so we're pretty well aligned, even though there's probably some there's more room for debate here, but I think we're pretty well aligned with our first few picks here. Okay, number 4 overall, my second pick. Lynx get Lindsay Whalen in 2010. Was that on your list?
Oh, it was my favorite. I was waiting for it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my second overall pick. They gave up a lot to get Whalen because if you remember they had to swap. I think it was the first and second pick overall in the draft with Connecticut, and they also traded a player to Connecticut who was awfully good. And that pick by Connecticut ended up being Tina Charles, who was still, I don't know if she's playing this year. She was still in the league as of last year. I think she's still active. Like, she's awfully good. She was the number 1 overall pick that year. She's been an MVP. Like Connecticut didn't get the short end of that trade by any stretch, but bringing Lindsay Whalen here, which they'd been trying to do for many years, they just didn't have a high enough draft pick in 2004 when she came out of college. There had been multiple, attempts, iterations of how can they get her. They finally had what it took to get her in 2010. And, then it took a year. They did not even make the playoffs in the first year that Whalen was here, but they missed it just enough to get the lottery pick that they got Maya Moore in 2011 with number 1 overall. They win the lottery. And then, obviously the dynasty that ensues from there, 4 championships in 7 years. Lindsay Whalen, Naismith Hall of Famer inducted recently. Like, that just kind of unlocked the modern Lynx in tandem with other players, but she became, clearly, the face of that franchise, or one of the faces of that franchise.
It's not dissimilar from the Tarkenton thing.
No.
But I will say, when I was saying at the start of this that I didn't know what I was going to do, there was a part of me that thought, is this the best trade in state history because of all of the layers that you're talking about? unleashing this franchise, bringing, the WNBA and the Lynx at that time. It's like you're trying to find marketplace. You're trying to figure out how to draw. It's the same thing you're seeing with all the discussion around Paige Beckers and the Lynx this year. Oh, should they tank? There's this thing of wanting to find the right way to engage your fan base, and bringing Lindsay Whalen to the Lynx, having the fortune of getting Maya Moore, building this dynasty. I think there's a real argument it's the best trade in Minnesota history, because how many players can you point to and say that helped to develop a legacy, to develop an entire franchise? I think that the relationship with Tarkington and Grant is a similar kind of concept, where you get Whalen, you get Cheryl Reeve, you get this feeling of just kismet, where people are meant to be where they are. And it was what a trade. I mean, and like you said, sometimes it's not about what you lose. You lose Tina Charles, you lose Renee Montgomery. These are good players. Montgomery came back and won some titles with the Lynx. But what you create is undeniable. So, the Lindsay Whalen story, is it underrated? Let's do a little underrated, overrated. I feel like Lindsay Whalen, her story in the state of Minnesota is one of one. I don't know who can touch it at this point. And it's still evolving and ongoing, but man, is she. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like you get Joe Mauer has this incredible story, but he never played here in college. I mean, he was the number 1 overall pick, played for the Twins, but didn't win a World Series, never won a playoff game. If we're being completely unfortunately honest, he never won a playoff game with the Twins, because he's been part of all of those teams since 2004 that haven't won anything. But it's interesting to think about the levels of her. Just like winning in college, going to the Final Four in college, winning 4 titles, being an Olympian, multiple gold medals. That legacy, notwithstanding, unfortunately, the fact that she couldn't get traction as a head coach and is now out of that program. What she did as a player, that story, you're right, I think I don't know if it's hard to imagine how there can be an equivalent to that.
Yeah, it's like if Kevin McHale or something had come down from Hibbing and or some equivalent to that. I mean, I don't know. It's just I'm endlessly fascinated by her story, and I continue to be, because as you wrote about earlier this year, it's like something. Anyway, we don't need to get into that. Also, I can't believe you just drugged Joe Mauer through the dirt like that. Just unbelievable.
These are facts. Facts. The truth cannot be controversial. Okay, what's the number 5 overall pick? What's your next pick?
All right. This will fall into a similar space, I think.
Okay.
I'm going with very recent history.
Okay.
I'm going Stephon Diggs for Justin Jefferson. A win-win if there ever was one, I think.
That was 6th on my board, so we're very much in step here.
Yeah, I think I love this trade because I loved Stephon Diggs. Much like, I don't know, the Kennedy assassination or any number of tragedies.
I want to know where you're going with this. This is interesting.
The exact opposite can be said about the Minneapolis Miracle. I can talk to anybody who cares about sports in this state and say, where were you when that happened? And I can tell you that I was in the Star Tribune building, and that, we're journalists, for God's sakes. We keep our independence. We have no rooting interest. But I'll tell you, when that play happened, I ran out of my desk, and I looked to my left down to where the major sports editor, I was off to the side. The main night desk was down in another part of the room. I looked down there. Paper is flying. People are just throwing things in the air. Euphoric. One of the great moments in Minnesota sports history. The thought that player would be gone in such short order, I think, is a very difficult thought to process for fans of this franchise, because he was such an remains such an incredible wide receiver. The fact that they were able to turn that into somebody who right now can stake his claim to being the most popular athlete in the state, one of the most, electrifying players we've ever seen on a franchise that is not short of amazing wide receiver talent, is just great. It's one of the great trades, and it's what every trade should aim to be. And it almost never happens. So I love
good
that.
For both teams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, it is, it's like, you think about the Randy Moss trade, the first one, well, I guess there was only one, but when they traded him to Oakland and got the number 7 overall pick and tried to do this same thing with Troy Williamson, it does not always work out. It does not.
We'll get into that trade. tomorrow.
Okay. I don't know if that's on my list yet, but I have to revisit that.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, premixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to mgmwineandspirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
Okay, I like it. I like that pick. I think we're on the same page right now. Okay, I'm gonna make my third pick, number 6 overall. I'm gonna go with another Twins trade here. The year is 1989. The Twins kind of, and I wouldn't call it a dynasty, but they jumped up and win a World Series in 1987. They're very good again in 1988, but fall short of the title. And then 1989, they're starting to fall off a cliff. They need to restart the franchise. They trade Frank Viola, looks like right at the trade deadline, July 31st, 1989, to the Mets for Rick Aguilera, Kevin Tapani, David West, Tim Drummond, and Jack Savage. Now, Tim Drummond and Jack Savage didn't exactly work out. David West was okay, but Aguilera becomes the closer on a lot of very good Twins teams. Kevin Tapani becomes a starter on some very good Twins teams, including the 1991 World Series. I don't think they win the 91 World Series if they don't make that trade based on how influential those players were. So sometimes those kind of 5-for-1 deals fizzle out, but they got 2 very important players in that deal.
Yeah, it's a good question if that's a better trade than the Pierzynski trade because of the result. Because I think you're right. You don't get 91 without that. And again, like you said, these kind of large package deals, you can look at them in all kinds of different ways. And often they do seem to go this way, that if you are sending back the large package, we'll get into one tomorrow that shows that in Minnesota, this is not always true. But I just think it's a great trade for that very specific reason. If we go to, did it get you to that place? Did it get you to that place that every team and fan base strives for? Well, you're exactly right. It doesn't happen without that deal. So I like it.
Okay, what do you got at number 7, Earl? By the way, Viola was good for the Mets. I don't think we should say that was a bad deal for the Mets. He was 20-12 for the Mets in 1990. He was a good pitcher for them as well. He was a third in the Cy Young voting in 90. So they did some good. He did some good things even after he was traded. So it worked for both teams. So
you're going to help me on this, okay? You know, I do not proclaim to be an expert on all things sports. And one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is the NHL. Okay. But in doing some research for this, I said, I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn about the history of the Wild. Okay. And I'm going to just make sure that there's nothing. And this trade to me stood out. And I think any Wild fan would say that this was one of the great steals. Okay. And that would be the Wild trading a 3rd-round draft pick for Devin Dubnyk.
Yes.
And all of the success that Dubnyk came to have, you know, from a place where maybe a lot of people didn't see this as being a franchise-altering type deal, or, you know, gaining the kind of player that would become, you know, a multiple-time All-Star, would become considered one of the best goaltenders in the NHL, and would really anchor that position, you know, for a number of years for the Wild. So when I looked at that and was thinking about small, not, again, kind of like the Pierzynski deal, not giving up a lot to gain somebody who brought a ton to your team, I thought that seemed like the best deal that the Wild have made from a trade perspective in their history. So I got that coming in here at number 7. Is that where we are?
Yeah, number 7. And that was on I had that on my honorable mention list. Like I had moved it around. It was in my top 10 for a little while, just because you're right of the impact it had. I mean, they were really struggling at goalie for a while there. They had kind of flatlined there. They'd made a kind of not a playoff run, but they'd won a playoff series, I think the year before, without much stability in goal. Yeah. And, you know, they were floundering again the next year. They bring in Dubnyk. And I remember actually writing something when they traded for Dubnyk, like, hey, this guy might be better than his stats show. Like, he's been on some bad teams. You look at some of his, like, kind of peripheral numbers, some of the advanced stats, like he might actually be better. And it made me look really good when he like took off and went on a tear that right after being acquired, like he was unstoppable. And I think they made it to the second round of the playoffs that year too. Now he was a little inconsistent as time went on, but for that year and for, you know, for the majority of the time that he was here for the next 3 or 4 years, he was very good. So I think there's definitely something to that and how good he was and how, you know, how he filled a need and didn't, it was a third round pick. That's all that cost.
Right.
And it was, I think you're right that swap was one of the better deals that the Wild have made in their history. And I actually, at number 8, I bend the rules. I host this show. I bend the rules a little bit. I put both ends of the Kevin Fiala trade at number 8. The acquisition of Kevin Fiala in the deal with the Nashville Predators, where they traded away Mikael Granlund. And, Granlund had been a good player here, but never really achieved his potential. They're Paul Fenton, they're much maligned temporary GM for about 14 months, made a whole flurry of deals. Some worked better than others. This was a good one. They bring in Fiala. He immediately becomes a pretty good scorer for them. They get the better of that deal. And then Bill Guerin, a couple years ago, is able to, realize the value of Fiala, realize they can't pay him, trades him to the Kings for Brock Faber and a first-round pick. Faber is going to be, probably anchor a top 4 D spot this year for the Wild. And that first-round pick, who knows what that's going to be, but that's pretty good value for, the years of production you got from Fiala plus what you gave up and then what you were able to ship him out for.
The thing that you're talking about is something that I really focused on in the worst drafts, which is the sort of long-term implication of a move. So I think it's fair to say that if you look at a trade, especially, this was a fairly short time period, right? Like Fiala was how many years was he here? Was it 4 or 5 seasons? I want to say something like that. You're really getting a benefit, and then you're moving on from it and saying, okay, we've taken this resource and done something with it. Let's see if we can create more momentum out of it. So I begrudgingly accept you using both ends of the trade to justify this position.
Thank
I don't
you.
know. Okay. That was
he was here for 3.5 years. 3.5 years.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good use of kind of bringing a player in and then shipping him back out and continuing to reap rewards off of it. So, okay. We're at
This is your last pick, number 9.
Well, this is a good one. And
Make it a good one, yes.
Well, I'll also say that, we're going to do a quick honorable mention thing,
yes,
right?
We'll talk about people that got left off the list that we still have on our own lists.
Because I have an emotional pick that I'm not going to make.
Good.
Stay away from my emotions.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I'm going, this is a tremendous, this is one of the great, this had to have been Rick Spielman, there's no question, but this is Jared Allen from the Chiefs, along with a 6th round pick. They swap 6th round picks with the Chiefs, and they send 3 more draft picks to Kansas City for Jared Allen.
Yeah.
Jared Allen, of course, comes to Minnesota, has to be one of the greatest personalities to ever arrive in the state. It felt like he rode in like it was a one-man rodeo coming to town. Yes. It's like everybody went country. We're all feeling good. It's like we're going to rodeo. We're just having a great time. But they also get John Sullivan with that 6th round pick.
That's right. They did.
Who becomes as just a tremendous, one of the great value draft picks of Spielman's career. The Chiefs get some value out of those deals. I think they got Jamal Charles, who, if you ever played fantasy football, Jamal Charles was one of those guys.
Yes.
Like, oh my God. But then he had injuries. His career was shortened. So it wasn't quite the impact it maybe could have been if he had a long-lasting career. But to me, you get Jared Allen and you get John Sullivan. You get the best draft pick out of a deal where you send 4 draft picks to another team and you land one of the great edge rushers in NFL history. Should it be higher? Maybe. I don't know. This is a great trade. That's a world-class trade.
That was an all-in move. I didn't have it on my list just because I thought they gave up a lot and then had to pay Allen a lot. Like you don't see a lot of moves like that these days, but it worked. It absolutely. He was such an important player for them in 2008, 2009. I mean, he's a Ring of Honor guy. He's a pro football, one of the all-time great edge rushers.
22 sacks. 22 sacks.
Yeah, he almost broke the record, right?
Yeah, unbelievable.
For a terrible Vikings team. Wasn't that the 2011 season when they won like 3 games, but he almost broke that record?
Who was here? Was Ponder here yet?
Yes, no. That was Ponder's rookie season. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Boy, those were some dark years. You just think about the names.
Do you remember who started the year at quarterback that year?
I've been looking up so many trades that I know I'm all jumbled around. So let me just think, because I was like, oh, was that Sam Bradford? No, that was much later. I won't get it. I don't know.
Donovan McNabb.
Jeez, I had so much hope for that. Boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Donovan McNabb, the Christian Ponder, iconic.
Not a great year.
Moment. Yeah.
Not a great year. Good year for Jared Allen, but not a great year for not a great year for the Vikings. And then to win 10 games the year after that when Adrian Peterson goes absolutely berserk and runs for 2,000 yards. But
now, wait, we have a lot to get to. Wait, we have a lot to get, and we need to finish. I mean, so I know we got to move. But have you been watching the quarterback thing?
I need to. I want to talk about it for a show. I haven't watched it yet.
Okay, I haven't either. But I think we're going to all of a sudden see the redemption of Kirk Cousins via Netflix, which is just synergy coming to life. All of a sudden, we're going to have a new favorite player around the state from a guy who everybody hated a year ago.
Yeah, I'll probably talk about that in a future show because I got to binge watch those when I get a chance. That just came out Wednesday. Okay, so last pick of the best trades in Minnesota history draft. I'm going to go. I don't know if this is controversial or not, because I think the honeymoon was very short, but that year that it was good was very good. I'm going to say the Timberwolves acquiring Sam Cassell and center Irvin Johnson for Joe Smith and Anthony Peeler. With the Milwaukee Bucks. Sam Cassell was still, he was 33 when they got him, so kind of at the tail end, but a guy who really, in tandem with KG and in some Latrell Sprewell that year, really changed that team, became a closer in the playoffs. Another one of the great what ifs, like if he doesn't get hurt before the Western Conference Finals, or is at full strength for that, do they beat the Lakers? Do they go to the NBA Finals? Do they win it all in 2004? So I'm going with the Sam Cassell trade, getting Sam Cassell, finally kind of unlocking enough of a playoff roster that they could get to the Western Conference Finals, the most success they've ever had.
I had that on my list at number. Well, it was in my honorable mention area. I think sort of in the same way that we talked about, the Viola trade, you can say this was one of those things that got the Wolves as close as they've ever been. And so I think there's a lot of justification for it. And again, just seeing Joe Smith, his name is very, very difficult to just read out loud for a Timberwolves fan.
Yes.
So seeing him go probably didn't hurt anybody's feelings, but no. I loved Sam Cassell. And again, like you said, one of the great what ifs in Wolves history is if he, and the backup was Terrell Brandon the backup that year? I'm trying to remember who was backing up Cassell.
No, I think it was, God, who was it that year?
Well, because remember, they had 2 point guards get hurt in the playoffs, and Fred Hoiberg, by the time it was all said and done, is out there running point.
I think it was still Troy Hudson.
Maybe it was Hudson. Yeah, okay, yeah. So there. And not only Cassell getting hurt, but then you lose Hudson, if we're both correct on this. You lose your 2 point guards, and all of a sudden you've got, drop dead Fred out there, who I love, Dead-Eye Fred.
Yes.
I you forever. Playing point guard in the Western Conference Finals against the Shaq Kobe Lakers.
Yeah, that just didn't work. I mean, they still took him to 6 games, but it was if they had Cassell, he did play some in that series, but he wasn't the same. His back, the back problems, and then of course it all falls apart next year. Sam Cassell Latrell has a family to feed, and next thing you know, they're firing Flip, and then a couple of years later they're trading KG. That was kind of the beginning of the end. But that year, Sam Cassell was the key. The key addition to that year, more so than Sprewell to me.
Yeah, it's funny how the world has changed. You're talking about Joe Mauer and stuff like this. Like the Wolves are trending in the right. We're going to get into this so much tomorrow. I can't even wait for it. So let's just move into the honorable mention quick. Okay.
Yeah. Who else who did we leave off your list?
I'll talk about just one, but I'll list a couple. Okay. I had Kevin Love for OJ Mayo.
Yep, I got that one too. That's good.
I had Nino Niederreiter for Cal Clutterbuck.
Yeah.
And then this was my one that I loved, that I can remember everything about it, was when the Twins traded for Shannon Stewart.
Yes, that was 10th on my list. Very nice.
Yes, I loved that deal. I can remember thinking, him making that leaping catch in Yankee Stadium, all the stuff where it was just like a team needing a little spark and feeling like, man, they made the perfect trade at the deadline. So I loved, the Minnesota has had some very good GMs, I think. They're no longer in those roles, but you think about some of the Terry Ryan moves, some of the Spielman moves. These people knew how to try to build winning franchises, and how to make that key move at the minute. And Shannon Stewart was one of my favorites.
Now, funny story. I was at the Star Tribune at the time. Actually, I was not the beat writer, but I was doing some backup work. I actually covered the very first game of the Twins Shannon Stewart era, wrote the game story. Wow. After that trade, and they were terrible. They were like 44-49 at the break before they acquired him. They were 20, I think they were 46-23 after the All-Star break, and that trade was almost exactly 20 years ago. By the way, we're talking about almost exactly 20 years ago. They beat the A's. I'm just looking up the box score right now because I want to be sure about this, but I believe the Twins batted around in the first inning. Yeah, they batted around. They scored 5 runs in the first inning of that game. Shannon Stewart made 2 of the 3 outs in the inning. He batted leadoff. He made 2 of the 3 outs. Like his first contribution to the Twins was making 2 of the 3 outs of a 5-run inning. But they won that game, and he obviously goes on a tear after that. And just the thing I remember the most about it, though, was he because the trade was so fresh, he didn't even have the bats he would typically use for that game. It was he was, and so pregame he was asked by reporters. I was like in the scrum, and I think he was asked pregame whose bats he was using, and he said he was using Luis Rivas's bats for that game. And I still remember, I think it was Tom Powers from the St. Paul Pioneer Press, columnist there for a long time, said, "Oh yeah, there's plenty of hits left in those bats." So, but he was awesome. He was great for them that year. And yeah, you're right. Made that catch in Yankee Stadium, just totally revamped their offense. Yeah, they won 2 out of every 3 games the rest of that season, and again won the second of 3 consecutive AL Central titles that year. Let me see a couple for me. I had kind of lumped Devin Dubnyk and Philip Gustafson together as kind of these goaltender acquisitions that kind of flew under the radar at the time. But, the Wild is giving up Cam Talbot, who looked like he was kind of part of that kind of 1-2 punch, getting Gustafson as kind of a more defined backup. But then Gustafson becomes really good last season, becomes their playoff starter and presumed part of their future. They still have to sign him this year, but I think that'll happen at some point here soon. You're right. I had the OJ Mayo draft night swap with Kevin Love. They also got Mike Miller in that deal, who they would eventually trade along with Randy Foye for the number 5 overall pick in the draft with the Washington Wizards. One of the 2 picks they did not use on Steph Curry in the 2009 draft. So a little bit of trivia there. And I also like this one as well. Let's watch this one as time goes on. But the 2021 deal where they traded at the deadline Nelson Cruz for Joe Ryan. That could become a very good one in the future, and already looks pretty good right now because Cruz was definitely at the end of an amazing career, and Ryan has been very good for them so far. Yeah,
that is a really good one to watch. It's been, the Diggs and Jefferson. I'm trying to think of recent trades that have been on the positive side, and that's one. Yeah, and same with Gustafson, where it's like, okay, maybe this is going to be one that's going to really pan out. But yeah. Okay. Well, very good. What was our number 1? Where did we start? I started this thing.
Yeah. Let's recap. I've got them all listed here. You had the AJ Przinsky trade. Then we had Johan, the kind of the technicality, the Rule 5 trade. You had Tarkenton. You had Tarkenton at number 3. I had Whalen at number 4. Yep. You took Diggs for Jefferson essentially at number 5. I had the Frank Viola trade at number 6. You had Dubnyk at 7. I had the Fiala trades at 8. You had Jared Allen at 9, and I had the Sam Cassell trade at 10. These are the best trades in Minnesota sports history. Agree, disagree? Who do you think had the better team? Email me, mrand@startribune.com, or you can find me on social media, Twitter @Randball, Threads, got to be on Threads now @Randball as well, or you can find Jeff any number of places as well. It's been fun being positive, Jeff. But I also can't wait for tomorrow's show where things are going to get negative too.
Yeah, me too. I think those are more fun.